If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Welcome to my channel where we cover the lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We cover the stories both big and small, the epic and the cute, the silly and the tragic. I hope you all enjoy the ride, and welcome to the Chronicler of Lore. After some events in Heavenswood that I'm not going to spoil here, a primal was summoned and sealed in a cocoon, much like Bahamut had meant, and it won't be long before it breaks free. The Garleans, of course, were interested in the thing, so they sent the ship to investigate, and it got blown out of the sky, so they decided not to approach like that again. That means dealing with it before it breaks free will be a real problem, and if a primal of that level escapes, it could lead to a calamity on the same scale as the one Bahamut had caused. At the moment, not even Cid has an idea on how to deal with the issue, but Nero, who's always willing to take any opportunity to one-up Cid, shows up, and he actually does have an idea. The primal inside of the cocoon is on the level of Bahamut, which means the best way to deal with that primal is to use the same machine that had trapped the dragon in the first place, Omega. The thing has been sleeping beneath the plains of Cartano since the time of the Allegans, and no one knows how to wake it up. No one except for Nero, that is. And he's willing to help. Since it's not like you have any better ideas or the time to figure one out, Cid can't really turn the man away, so Nero proves his usefulness by pointing out one simple thing. If the Allegans were able to turn Omega off, then it can be turned on again and controlled. Granted, if you can't control it, you'll have turned on something even more dangerous than the primal you're trying to fight. It's a valid concern, but an irrelevant one since you have no other options. And while Nero always has his own goals that may very well lead to your death, he did prove useful when you dealt with the Crystal Tower, so if you watch him, it should be okay. So the Alliance puts Cid and the Scions on the task of reviving Omega. Just in case Nero does anything shady, Alice gives Yugiri permission to kill him, and of course she's okay with that. So you all hop onto the Excelsior to head out to Cartano after a quick trip to the Rising Stones to get a little more information and to snatch up some allies because there's bound to be some fighting, especially since the Garleans know about Omega and will probably be coming for it. Out in Cartano, Nero turns on the teleporter to Omega's control room, but of course a group of Garleans show up, just like you expected. They attack you because that's what they do, and Nero leaves you to it while he goes in the control room. Since Cid won't let the man press buttons without somebody there to watch him, he follows him inside while the rest of you deal with the Garleans. Nero doesn't just leave you all out to dry, he sends his own personal Magitech suit to help you blow things up. That gives you the edge you need to force a retreat, and then you can head inside too. Between Nero and Cid, the two of them manage to wake up Omega. As soon as it turns on, it detects the trapped primal, but there's also no controls. Apparently the thing was made to run on its own, which means controlling it is out of the question. So once it beats the primal, it'll need to be put back to sleep. Now let's be honest, how many of you actually think that'll work? But there's still no other option, so the button is pressed and Omega powers up and flies off to deal with the dragon primal Shinryu right as it breaks out of its cocoon. The amount of power released by the primal and Omega far exceeds anything you've seen before, but after the two of them get into an anime style beam struggle, the explosion sends them both flying off somewhere. All signals from the weapon stop going to the terminal where you are, which could mean that Omega was destroyed, but you won't know until you all check with someone who was outside and able to see the fighting. Apparently Emmerich saw both the primal and Omega fall out of the sky somewhere over Alamigo, and they both looked pretty dead, but you won't know for sure until you get closer. Cid did press the shutdown buttons for Omega, so if it ends up in the Garleans' hands, it shouldn't do them any good. That doesn't mean that Cid and the Ironworks, Nero included, won't search for the thing. They still want to find it first. The Ironworks sets up shop in Ralga's Reach while they hunt for Omega, and during their search they find out that Shinryu was taken by the Garleans. The thing was already tied up when they found it, which means Omega had restrained it. That also means it hadn't powered down when Cid had told it to, so there's no telling what the thing is doing. They've pretty much found out where it's located, but before they can head to the site, they have to deal with a little problem called Nero. Apparently Jesse hired him on as a consultant for the Ironworks on the Omega hunt, even though Cid was hoping to be rid of him after they lost the thing. He doesn't trust him, but firing him wouldn't be the smartest thing to do since Jesse already paid him in full, and his salary was about as high as Cid's. Plus, whether they like each other or not, you can't deny the fact that Nero is good at what he does. That doesn't mean Cid's gonna let him roam around unsupervised, and guess who gets put on chaperone duty? Truthfully, Cid's glad you're there because they still don't know how powerful Omega is. Even if Shinryu damaged it, they don't think they'll be able to shut it down without some added muscle, meaning you. Cid's found the place where the weapon probably crashed, and having you check the site with him will leave him a little less unsettled. I don't remember the Warrior of Light ever saying no to anything, which is convenient because the ether readings at the yawn where Omega crashed have started to go crazy, meaning it's probably waking up. Without wasting any more time arguing, you all race off to the yawn. Something strange is going on at that giant hole. For starters, it's full of ether so thick that you can see it. It's so unusual that it causes Midgard Sormer to appear. The Elder Dragon hadn't talked to you since the Dragon Song War ended, but when he smelt Omega, he had to come out. He's known the weapon for multiple lifetimes, and they are not friends. Before the dragon could tell you any more, you're all interrupted because a chocobo that looks like a children's toy comes flying out of the ether swimming pool with a very big winged snake trying really hard to eat it. The chocobo leads the thing right towards you all, but instead of eating Cid, it passes right through him. The thing is one of Omega's creations. Midgard Sormer tells you that Omega was made somewhere far away, and it has the ability to create life with ether. The snake isn't finished, which is why it passed through Cid's body, but the dragon is positive that Omega will finish it soon, then he'll have it try to eat you again. The snake flies back into the pool of ether, but the weird chocobo stays behind. The thing looks like a toy, but it is about the size of the chocobo that the Lalafell ride, so everyone just takes Wedge's word for the thing being real. Since it came from Omega, Midgard Sormer talks to it for you because apparently he can speak stuffed animal. The fact that the tiny dragon is the same Midgard Sormer who supposedly died at the Battle of Silvertear Skies is not something any of the others expected, but Nero is more than willing to use the dragon's ancient knowledge since there's not all that much known about Omega. The first time it appeared in any records was way back in the Third Astral Era, before the Allegan Empire became the Nation of Legend, and the only thing the record said is that Omega was successfully activated. After that, Allegan technology jumped ahead in leaps and bounds, but Omega was never mentioned again until the capture of Bahamut. Some people, Nero included, had assumed the Allegans had built Omega, but apparently it came from another planet. And because Midgard Sormer likes to study from the school of keeping people in suspense, he won't say any more about where Omega came from. He did talk to the Chocobo and it told him about a weird place that it had lived in since it was made. It was created to fight by Omega so it could test the power of its creations, but it wasn't that strong so it ran, and somehow ended up in your world. That's all it knew. If you want to know more, you'll have to jump into Omega's ether. The ether has made the hole a portal into Omega's domain, so the fall won't kill you. If you decide to go, the little Chocobo agrees to guide you. And since Midgard Sormer and Omega have a history, the dragon offers to help you too. So, because you're all geniuses, you jump feet first into the gooey purple ether and end up in the white room from the Matrix with your bodies as transparent as the flying snakes had been. Omega appears as a giant old school box TV, claiming that he's been waiting for you. You are in a rift between dimensions where he is in the middle of running an important experiment, and if you refuse to participate, he'll erase you from existence. Probably should have read the terms of service before you logged into his world because you signed your life away on the dotted line and now there's nothing you can do about it. After you decide not to die, Omega assigns you to what he calls the Alpha Group and brings you into the heart of his dimension. The purpose of his experiment is to determine who is the strongest being in creation. He has chosen 89 different participants and grouped them by dimension, then put them against each other. Like the Final Fantasy version of the Mortal Kombat tournament. I would have said it was like Super Smash Bros., but these are death battles, so I think Mortal Kombat is more accurate. The Chocobo, who Omega calls Alpha, is the leader of your group, but your position might change after Omega puts you through a strength test. He needs to know how well you can fight before he can determine your value. He'll create an obstacle course for you, and if you can make it through and reach the Deltascape testing world, then you'll be labeled as worthy subjects. Before you can even interact with things, you have to be authorized by Alpha, which basically means you'll no longer be transparent. Once that's done, you all get to fight your way down Omega's testing road, which takes a little bit of something from all of you. Wedge does a little work disabling some barriers while the rest of you get to break some things. The preliminary tests aren't all that difficult until Omega creates a behemoth to put you down. But you all deal with it and reach the Deltascape, where Omega has creatures from other dimensions ready to fight you. Since you made it through the test, Omega got the chance to gauge your strength. By his calculations, your group is the weakest, most pathetic group among all the other creatures he's chosen. Unlike his other combatants who he's recreating based off of beings from other worlds, you are actually physically there, so you can use this part of the rift to enter the Deltascape and defeat your opponents. You can bring a few allies, but Omega has set a limit, so you can't bring a whole army and just overwhelm his creations. So in typical Sid fashion, he sets up a small command center in the area where they can gather all the information they can on your opponents. And your first opponent is that same snake that you saw chasing Alpha, only this time it's finished, so its teeth won't be passing harmlessly through you. Your first fight in Omega's Tournament of Death is against a giant serpent who honestly isn't all that powerful once you're actually able to hit it. Since the robot was talking about grabbing the strongest beings, you would have expected him to get something a little stronger than a flying garden snake, but no one's really going to complain about an easy win, especially when you're not likely to have many more of those. Sid and the others were able to watch your battle on the different monitors around the Deltascape hub after he and Nero did a bit of hacking, and they weren't all that surprised that you won the fight either. They tried to learn a little bit about the thing you were fighting, but other than its name, they didn't get much, although they think they'll be able to do better in the future. With a little more snooping around, they realized that there are a total of 4 people for you to fight in the Deltascape, including the one that you just beat, which means you still have 3 more matches in this world alone. And seeing how Omega has a lot more of these digital worlds out there, you're gonna be busy. The reason why the robot is so focused on finding who the strongest being is a whole nother question entirely, one that Midgard Sommer has an answer for. Omega's primary goal is to improve itself, and the best way to do that is by fighting strong enemies. After it beat Shinryu, it didn't have any stronger opponents, so it decided to make its own, which is why it created this not-so-little test. But making life isn't Omega's primary function, so making complex creatures takes a serious toll on it, which is why it's making creatures in this Matrix-style world. That way it can determine which one is actually worth creating in the real world. So once the test is over, Omega will create something even stronger than Shinryu so it can fight it. Needless to say, a fight on that scale could cause another calamity, which means stopping it is mandatory. There's still the question of Alpha. Unlike Omega's other creatures, the weird chocobo was fully formed even outside of the rift, but it's not the most complex of creatures, so Omega may have finished it on accident. When Omega had first flown off, Sid had tried to put it back in stasis, which didn't work, meaning something had likely malfunctioned, and since any means of stopping the superpowered robot is important, Biggs figures that he and Wedge should head back to Cartano to see if they can figure out what went wrong while you keep doing your usual job of smashing things. If Biggs can't figure out how to turn Omega off, then the only way to stop him from making something even stronger than Shinryu is for the Warrior of Light to prove that she's the strongest being in creation. Granted, then you would have to fight Omega, which is still bad. But for now, there's nothing to do but keep on with the tests, and for the second match, you have to fight a creature that can manipulate gravity. Nero being Nero, he's already built a device that should help you counter that power, so it's off to the second Deltascape battlefield you go to face off against a very disgusting monstrosity called Catastrophe. If it wasn't for Nero's little toy, the tentacle monster definitely would have murdered you, but because you brought the right tool for the job, the battle is another win under your belt. Since there's no telling how long it'll be before Biggs and Wedge have something to report, you may as well move on to the third challenge, which has you dealing with a being called Halicarnassus, the Queen of Dimension Castle. Nero actually knows the name, and since it's some knowledge he has that Sid doesn't, he makes it a point to rub it in the man's face. She's the villain from an old fable that was loosely based on some events that supposedly took place in the 4th Astral Era, but there's no way to know for sure. People think the story is pure fiction now, which means Omega is bringing fairy tale creatures to life. Considering the fact that Omega is a machine with no real creativity of its own, the only way it can create a new rival is by using other people's ideas. Omega has knowledge of entire eras stored in its memory banks, and that knowledge isn't just from one particular shard, but the whole concept of real and fake doesn't really mean anything to it. So whether a story was true or not, that won't stop him from bringing the concepts to life. So whether Halicarnassus was real or otherwise, you're still about to have to fight her. And it is definitely a unique experience straight out of a storybook, but she's still not the weirdest or most powerful thing that you fought, so you pass another of Omega's tests without all that much effort. For the final challenge, you have to face a name that will be familiar to some, XIV, which is the recreated version of the main villain from another world, namely Final Fantasy V. The only info Nero was able to pull up about him was that he can wield the power of the Void, but he has no idea what that power will actually do, so his advice is just don't get hit by it. Sid has something a little more useful to add. Both Halicarnassus and XIV are people from stories where they were defeated in the end by heroes, which means they weren't even the strongest beings from their own worlds. So why wouldn't Omega recreate the things that beat them instead of the ones that lost? That's a very good question, one you don't have an answer for. And after Sid gets a call from Biggs, there are even more questions. Apparently the stasis field is showing every sign of being activated even though it's not. It could have just malfunctioned after taking some damage during the calamity, but the controls are complex even compared to other Allegan devices, so the odds of them figuring out a quick fix are slim, which means you have to go and face off against XIV. He proves himself to be a strong challenge for the final match of the Deltascape, but as expected, the Warrior of Light manages to win. Since you won all 4 matches, Omega shuts down Deltascape and declares you the victors. His other test worlds haven't completed their trials yet, so you get a moment to lick your wounds out in the real world while you wait for round 2. The whole thing seems to be going too smoothly for Nero's liking, but Midgard-Sommer thinks his mistrust is misplaced. Omega could have done this entire experiment without letting any of you know, but instead it brought you in and let you make it as far as you have. It makes the dragon ask the question that Sid and the others should have been asking. What is Alpha, and why was he sent to you? Sadly, not even the little chocobo knows its own purpose, which means all you can do is wait and see. To top things off, Omega hadn't expected you to survive, but he's noticed that certain beings tend to get stronger when they are put into really stressful situations, which means if he wants to draw out your true potential, the best way to do that would be to put you under severe stress. And nothing does that like killing one of your friends. After the traumatizing experience of dealing with the first part of Omega's test, the Warrior of Light, Sid, Nero, and Alpha, who unlike Omega's other creations, seems perfectly fine being out in the real world, all head back to Rhalgr's Reach to let Jessie know what happened. She's extremely grateful for how much you've helped the Ironworks with their Omega investigation. And I'm gonna be honest, the more she talks, the easier it is to see that Jessie is the true owner of the Ironworks, which makes sense since Sid likes to dive headfirst into danger. When she finally notices Alpha, she decides, since he followed Sid home, that he's basically part of the Garland Ironworks family, and since he's cute, she wants to make a lot of merchandise out of him, which is pretty good business. People buy cute things, and businesses like money. Sid thinks it's a bit rude to talk that way about a guest, but that's why Jessie runs things, because he'll miss out on opportunities over little things like respect and manners. Usually Biggs and Wedge would be there to add their own unique brand of insanity to the group, but for some reason they haven't made it back from Omega's control room yet, which has Sid a bit worried since that place isn't exactly safe, so he decides to take his ship and go and check on them. And to make sure he doesn't get sidetracked, Jessie sends you and Nero with him, and Sid decides to bring Alpha to keep Jessie from starting her plan of making toys out of him. Out in the Cardinal Flats, you find both Biggs and Wedge badly injured. A monster had appeared out of thin air to attack them. Omega's voice comes over the computer system claiming that his mission was a failure since Biggs and Wedge survived, but since the attack did stress you out, his original objective was fulfilled. Omega doesn't even try to hide the fact that it attacked your friends. It can create simple life forms instantly anywhere, and while they won't be a threat to the Warrior of Light, most of your kind are far more squishy, and Omega could set hordes of creatures loose in any city or crowded area that he chooses, raining death and destruction down on the people without warning. Omega's plan is still to find a formidable warrior, but during his hunt for proper test subjects, he came across people who others called heroes. Throughout history, they were unremarkable people who managed to overpower far superior beings by doing what some people would call miracles. If it had happened once or twice, Omega could have ignored it, but it's far too common for him to simply write off. That's what the robot wants to understand. That way, if this power to transcend one's limits is something he can learn, he'll add it into his own evolution. That's the main reason why he brought you to his realm. Because you were able to overcome the first trials, that makes you fit to stay on as his test subject. It's not like he's giving you a choice. If you quit, he'll wipe out the mortals. I don't think Omega would be able to kill everyone, but there's no doubt the death toll would be massive before it could be stopped. So you have no choice but to participate. But first you have to get Biggs and Wedge some medical attention. Sid and Nero take your injured friends to the Conjurers Guild to get patched up, while you head back to Rhalgr's Reach to let Jessie know what happened. She's obviously worried, but she calms down a bit when Sid shows up and lets her know that they'll live. It'll be a while before the Conjurers let them go, but they'll be okay. Sid blames himself for ever activating Omega, but he didn't exactly have a choice since you all needed something to fight Shinryu. But with Omega threatening to kill everyone, it's not like the situation is any better. Nero actually fusses at Sid for blaming himself like he's some type of hero who has to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's a scientist, not a fighter, and protecting people is someone else's job. He's the person who makes the discoveries that makes the lives of the people heroes protect better. But ever since his dad caused the destruction of Bajja, he started trying to be more conservative, which limited his creative juices. Nero wants him to knock it off, because when he's not doubting himself, Sid tends to do the impossible, which is a serious compliment coming from Nero. Whether Nero's pep talk worked or not remains to be seen. Regardless, since the stasis field can't be reactivated, you have to go through Omega's trials. And that means you could be fighting anything Omega comes up with. So all that's left is to wait for the all-powerful Murderbot to summon you. Before they were attacked, Biggs and Wedge had found a tombstone, so Sid's gonna use this little bit of downtime to see what information it has on it, just in case it might help you with the next thing Omega throws at you. It doesn't take long for the Ironworks to detect the surge of energy from the yawn, which means Omega is probably getting ready for the next test. Despite the impending doom that will come if you were to fail one of these tests, Nero seems to be excited about all of this, but since you don't have a choice but to participate, you may as well have fun, which means it's time to head back to the yawn. But before you leave, Jesse gives Alpha his very own Garland Ironworks uniform, which Jesse made primarily to advertise some of their merchandise. With that out of the way, it's back to the yawn you go, and once again Midgard-Sormer comes with you. When you step back into the rift, it's pretty clear that some things have changed. Some of the floating eggs are missing. That's because while you were away, Omega kept his experiments going, and half of his test subjects were wiped out, all in the fashion he had predicted. All of them except for yours. To remind you of what he will do if you fail, Omega shows you the images of Biggs and Wedge lying on the floor half dead after his attack. Midgard-Sormer asks his old enemy what has it actually accomplished since the end of their war, other than simply still being alive. The robot can't even remember where his home planet is, but that doesn't take away from his objective to fight and evolve, and that means he needs to see what you're capable of. So once again, Alpha Group has to fight their way through to Omega's next testing site, and Alpha plans on helping you this time. Of course, this test is far more difficult than the first one, but Alpha proves to be more useful than you expected, and Nero has upgraded his Garlean armor. He summons the armor like Iron Man, and his weapon is Mjolnir, so he's literally an Avenger who helps you take down Omega's version of Emperor Zand. Nero's armor was cool, but Sid's more curious about the cool magic that Alpha used. While it looks cute, Alpha was made for combat, so the little chocobo can fight. After seeing what you can do, Omega labels you as inferior test subjects, and he even sees Midgard-Sormer as weak, but since the dragon is far weaker than he was in life, that makes sense. He had given his life to Heidelin when he had brought his children to a world, so she could summon him whenever he was needed. Omega had chased Midgard-Sormer when he had fled the Dragon Star, but when he had made it to your world, he couldn't find the dragon, so it had started working on repairing itself while it looked for something else to fight. That still doesn't tell Omega why the dragon is helping the mortals. Omega and his people caused the destruction of Midgard-Sormer's home, which makes the dragon hate to even look at the robot, so he helps you so that you can destroy Omega. That thought is illogical because even Midgard-Sormer in his prime couldn't beat the robot, so helping something as weak as you doesn't make sense. But that doesn't matter. It's time for you to enter the Sigmascape and continue the test. In the Deltascape, the image that was floating on the giant egg was a castle. This time the image is a mask. Sid and Nero have no idea what it is, but it's very creepy. Since they don't have anything to go off of, they can't figure out what you're going to face, so you'll have to go in your first challenge blind. That challenge is against the Phantom Train. This fight should bring back a lot of memories for those of you who played Final Fantasy VI, but unfortunately you can't suplex the train. You do stop it nonetheless. That fight was extremely strange, but it gave Sid the data he needed to figure out the Sigmascape. Apparently it is the recreation of a devastated world that has some places with names similar to the ones in your world like Doma, but their histories are different. As for your next opponent, it is Chartanuk, which is a demon that possessed a painting. Nero has actually built something to help you change things around you by painting to help you counter the powers of the demon. And as payment for his efforts, he wants some tea, but the teapot was empty, which makes him insult Sid's parentage. Since the two are arguing over the tea, Alpha decides to set one of his cards with a picture of spring water on it beside the teapot before you dive back into the Sigmascape to fight the demon of the painting. The fight was intense, and without Nero's little toy you wouldn't have won, but you had it, so you won. Of course, the magic brush was only meant to work there, and if you try to use it anywhere else, it won't do anything. After the battle, Sid gets a call that Biggs and Wedge have recovered, and they're heading to the yawn to see you guys. Nero, of course, stays in the rift to try and learn more while you, Sid, and Alpha go to check on your friends. The two of them weren't exactly supposed to be up and out, but they didn't want to lay around while you fought. But you're all making things work without them, although the little jobs like keeping the teapot full have been getting neglected. The two agree to go rest, but they want you all to call them if something goes wrong. While you're talking to your friends, Nero learns that the next challenger isn't all that special, but your fourth opponent may be a problem because he seems to be nothing but total chaos. While he's working, he takes a sip of his tea, which was apparently made with salt water, which makes Nero think that studying Alpha's cards might be a good idea. The whole time he's working, Omega is watching, and he decides that your group is getting too comfortable, so he attacks Nero. Whatever Omega didn't kill Nero, but he doesn't look well when you guys return. Instead of telling you about the attack, he blames it on the salt water in the teapot. He knows Sid didn't do it because he didn't fill the teapot at all. Instead, the water came from the card Alpha used by the pot. Nero leaves Sid to help you deal with the third challenge while he gets ready for number 4. The third one is against someone called Guardian, and it should be a straightforward fight. The machine is designed to switch through a bunch of different fighting styles, but compared to what you fought before, it's nothing special and you take it down a lot easier than some of the others. The things that you fought in Sigmascape show that whatever world Omega copied was very advanced in both magic and technology. Sid wishes they could have learned from them, but it's time for the last fight in this world. It's against someone that every Final Fantasy VI player will know very well, Kefka. Sephiroth may be the most famous Final Fantasy villain, but he failed at destroying the world. Kefka succeeded and obtained godlike power, and that's what you're going up against. And Kefka is insane, so figuring out his techniques won't be easy, so Nero tweaked the monitors so he can watch the fight more closely, that way he can help you. Kefka is just as crazy as he was in his own world, and he's just as powerful, but he lost to Terra and her crew in Final Fantasy VI, and he loses to you, which concludes your test in Sigmascape. With the fighting done, Nero finally collapses, which forces him to admit that Omega had attacked him. But he doesn't regret staying behind alone, because regardless he can safely say that the only reason you survived the Sigmascape is because of him and his inventions. But he knows he won't be able to help with the next round, so Sid's gonna have to step it up, both to beat Omega and to fulfill his goal of freedom through technology. Omega congratulates you on your victory, once again overcoming your limits and beating enemies who were stronger than you. He thinks he's figured out how you do what you do. During regular activities, you subconsciously limit your strength, but when you fight, your power increases by an unpredictable amount, which means he needs to put you in serious danger to see what your true power is, and he decides to do it right now. Omega seals the Warrior of Light in a prison, and in 3 minutes he's going to kill you, so you'd better do everything you can to escape. Alpha tries to break you free, but he's far too weak, so Midgard Sormer draws on all of the power he has left to shatter your prison, but using that much power forces him to hibernate until his strength comes back. Before he fades away, he tells Omega that trying to force you to use a power he doesn't understand is stupid. If he wants to see your true power, he needs to finish his experiments, not try to skip steps. He fades away and Omega decides to listen to his words and let you recover before the next test. Before he changes his mind, you, Sid, and Alpha take Nero back to Raga's Reach to give your report to Jesse and to get Nero some medical attention. He's not doing well. He was hurt pretty badly by Omega's creation, and it was a miracle he stayed on his feet for as long as he did. But it goes without saying that he won't be able to join you when Omega summons you again, meaning your crew has gotten even smaller as you get ready to step into the final leg of Omega's test. Back in Raga's Reach, the Warrior of Light shows up just in time for Jesse to tell her that another anomaly was detected at the Yawn, which means that Omega is ready for you again. That also means you don't have all that long to wait before Omega decides to attack the world. Sid's been working hard on figuring out how to deal with the Murderbot, and since he still hasn't shown up, Jesse lets you know what he's been working on. After your last run-in with Omega, Sid had some research notes smuggled in from Garlemald. All of the papers were things left behind by Sid's father, Midas, who was basically the Empire's top engineer and the one who had built the tower meant to harness the power of Dalamud, which led to the destruction of Bastia. Sid was supposed to take his father's position as the chief engineer, but after the Bastia incident, he decided to leave Garlemald altogether. He had never liked how they operated anyway, and the Bastia incident was the last straw. But since things are getting desperate, Sid must have decided that the knowledge that had been used to make the lunar transmitter might be the only thing that can solve the Omega problem, because if Sid is willing to do one thing, it's whatever it takes to solve a problem. Sid finally shows up after Jesse tells you everything, which means it's time to head to the Yawn. Unfortunately, Biggs, Wedge, and Nero are still in no condition to help. Neither is Midgard-Sormer. Jesse volunteers to join you, but Sid needs her to finish the device he was working on. While she heads off to do that, you, Sid, and Alpha head to the Yawn. Sid does have a plan, but the only way to know if it'll work is to test it, so the three of you dive back into the interdimensional rift. More of Omega's test worlds are gone, meaning his experiments are nearly over. Out of the 89 groups he tested, only 4 had survived. Omega pitted them against each other, and now only 1 is left. And you will face off against that world. If you win, then you'll face Omega, so he can finally figure out how you keep beating opponents who are so much stronger than you are. That way he can add that ability to his own repertoire. This time Omega won't put you through the evaluation process since he already knows your strength level, but he does declare that Alpha's part in this is all officially over, since Omega will personally give you access to the rift. But whether he's needed for that or not, Alpha's a part of the crew, and Sid wants him with you. Omega can't understand why you would want Alpha along since he's now useless, not to mention the fact that Alpha was originally made to be bait to lure you into Omega's domain, which worked out quite well. For some reason, Sid and the Warrior of Light hadn't figured that out, but it's not Alpha's fault. The little chocobo has no memories of anything that happened before he met you. He was the first thing Omega had made in the rift, and it was his only attempt at making something based off of an ordinary life form that had managed to beat an enemy that was nearly as strong as Omega himself. He wanted to watch Alpha to figure out how that was even possible, but despite him repeating the experiment 1,000 times, Alpha simply died, which led Omega to make his current test with you. So he erased Alpha's memories and planted the command to come back into the rift, then he sent him out into the world. Since weak creatures like to form groups to survive, he figured Alpha would gather test subjects for him. And it worked like a charm, despite the fact that Omega's ability to create things wasn't meant to be used to make life forms. The ability was meant to be used to improve Omega's weapons and armor, but nothing prevents him from using it in the way that he has. But Sid knows the dangers of using technology for things outside of its original purpose. It never turns out the way it's supposed to, which is why all of Omega's test subjects have been weaker than they should have been. His creations could never replicate the things that had motivated their original selves to achieve great or terrible things, nor could it copy the strong desires that the heroes had to use to overcome their enemies, which is why nothing Omega makes will ever be able to beat you, at least according to Sid. That still remains to be seen, so after Sid gets the base camp ready, it's time to get ready to dive into the final test world. Omega didn't even bother trying to hide who you were fighting. Your opponent is Chaos, the main villain from Final Fantasy I, and a name I'm sure you've heard over and over in the Stranger of Paradise trailer. It makes perfect sense that Chaos was the winner of Omega's little contest, and it definitely won't be an easy fight. But before you head off to kill Chaos, Sid has to assure Alpha that regardless of what Omega said, your current situation isn't his fault. It was you all who woke Omega up in the first place, which means if it's anyone's fault, it's Sid's. The little chocobo still feels bad, but Sid gives him the job of keeping the teapot full with his magic card, and that makes him feel better, so it's off to fight Chaos you go. Chaos isn't nearly as difficult to overpower as he should have been, proving that Sid was right to think that Omega could not create creatures nearly as powerful as they would have been in their original realities. Regardless, you've won, completing Omega's experiment and proving yourself to be the superior warrior. But the robot still can't understand how you do what you do, which makes him start to believe that Sid was right about his creations being flawed. He begins to wonder if mortals simply have an ability that he can't measure, but he can't accept that, and decides to examine you from a different angle. He sends you to a new place that he creates from his own memories, a place where he fought an enemy like none he'd ever faced before, one that he never got to beat. He can't recreate it exactly, but he comes close. Since he couldn't defeat this opponent, if you lose, Omega will still fight you. If you survive, that is. Which is unlikely, since you're about to face off against Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer himself, one that is nearly as strong as he had been on the Dragon Star. Omega wants you to fight the dragon right away, but since you just had a fight with Chaos and aren't at full strength, Omega listens to Sid and allows you to head back to your base camp to rest, where you find Alpha standing there with a very invisible Sid. Apparently, whatever Alpha had used to make the tea caused Sid to turn invisible. Fortunately, it turns out to be temporary. They really need to study Alpha's cards, but first you have to figure out how to fight Midgard-Sormer. With what you've learned from Omega, it's pretty clear that both the dragon and Omega come from other worlds, worlds that were at war with one another, which is what made the dragon grab his children and leave the Dragon Star with Omega chasing him. What you're up against is the younger, more savage version of the dragon that Omega remembers. Even though you've squared off against the dragon in the past, this is definitely going to be different. And since Omega created this battle on the spur of the moment, Sid can't even use the monitors to learn anything. So instead of wasting time while you fight the dragon, Sid will go to make preparations for the battle with Omega. So all you have to do is fight a version of the father of the first brood and not die. The fact that this version of Midgard-Sormer is not at his full power in this form is very good because you wouldn't have beaten him otherwise, and very bad because if at his full power he couldn't take down Omega, the Warrior of Light is probably going to die. Sid watched your battle while he worked, and he noticed that Omega's version of Midgard-Sormer looked a lot like Shinryu, which isn't all that strange since Shinryu wasn't summoned with any particular belief system to dictate how he looked. When he was summoned, he was meant to be a being as powerful as Bahamut, and apparently that made him take the form of the oldest dragon on Hydaelyn. It's not important, Sid just finds it ironic that summoning Shinryu led back to Omega, meaning you were seeing history repeat itself, at least a little bit. Regardless, you've passed the final test, so Omega shuts down all of his test worlds and transfers all of his power back into himself so he can test you properly. It seems like a battle you're destined to lose, but Sid thinks he knows Omega's weakness, and he's been working on something that should let you take advantage of it. He just needs a little more time to get ready. Always being one to use every tool at his disposal, he plans on making use of Alpha's cards too if it comes down to that. Aside from what looks like junk that the little chocobo keeps with him in places that I don't plan on trying to figure out, he has one card that looks like it either makes you bigger or smaller. Since he's not all that sure how it works, Sid thinks it'll be better to let Alpha decide when it's the best time to use it, which doesn't ease the little guy's worries at all. As a last bit of backup, Sid fills up a vial with Alpha's turn you invisible teapot water, just in case it has a purpose. With the preparations made, and a little pep talk for the chocobo that gets him fired up, you all head out of the rift to get Sid's device from Jesse. You follow Sid back to the Reach, where even though his device is ready, his hand trembles when he reaches for it because he's still traumatized by what his father had done when he used that particular bit of tech. Nero comes to talk to his old friend despite the fact that he's supposed to be in bed, and like Sid, Nero already figured out Omega's weakness. When he'd fought Shinryu, the only thing that had made it through Omega's defenses was a burst of lightning, so electricity can do some real damage. But it has to be a serious burst of electricity, like enough energy to, say, wipe out a city, which is why Sid is having an issue. When his father had made a link between the lunar transmitter and Dalamud, he came up with a method of gathering and storing massive amounts of energy, and that's what you'll need to beat Omega. Sid's improved his father's device as best he could, so it should be safe, but he can't stop thinking about the Bosnia incident every time he looks at the thing. He still sees the dead bodies and how the Empire's leaders didn't care at all. The biggest problem is that all of the death and destruction was caused by technology that was meant to help people, which is why he left and vowed only to build things that helped people. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and regardless of what he's wanted to do, there's always a way for things to go south, and he has to think about them and plan for them, which is the complete opposite of how he used to be. But even though he's changed, his overthinking has caused problems too. As usual, Nero solves Sid's mental dilemma with a very simple solution. Omega is all about testing people to find out what's the best way to do things. Sid can use the same method on himself. He feels that his new, more cautious way of doing things is superior to the old Sid. If that's the case, then the device he's made should be enough to stop Omega, because the old Sid would have been able to build something that could do the job. So basically, if you survive, Sid's new way is superior. If not, you all die. That should make Sid more nervous, but his hand stops shaking, so it's time to head back into the rift. Sid gives the Warrior of Light the control switch for the item he uncreatively named the Omega Jammer, so you can throw massive bursts of lightning at the robot with a little help from Sid, and you step into the arena to do battle with Omega. As expected, Omega is incredibly powerful, but with Sid's Omega Jammer, the Warrior of Light manages to beat the robot. Omega analyzes your fighting style and the sporadic, unpredictable way you fight, along with the random bursts of strength at critical moments, which reminds him of Midgard-Sormer, but the immeasurable changes seem stronger in weak creatures like yourself, which doesn't make sense to him. There has to be something special about you, and Omega's programming demands that he adds the ability to himself. which means he needs to approach the problem from a different angle. He needs to change his own physical structure, and he'll need to collapse the rift to do it. Unfortunately for you and Sid, there's nothing but the void outside of the rift. If it collapses, the two of you will die, which is Omega's plan. He can't have you alive to attack him while he remodels his body. You were good test subjects, but you're replaceable. He'll just send Alpha out to find new ones once he's done changing. Omega and the rift vanish, leaving you, Alpha, and Sid alone in the void. Alpha, being one of Omega's creations, is built to be able to find his creator, so he races to where the robot is. Omega believes that you and Sid died when the rift collapsed, but using a combination of Alpha's invisibility T and his shrinking card, the two of you shrank down and rode the little chocobo back to Omega. Alpha, the thing that Omega thought was useless, is the only reason you're still alive. The fact that Alpha went to such lengths to save you is something Omega can't understand, but having you there allows him to finish his tests. He completes his transformation and emerges in his new body, a very human-looking body. Apparently he decided that your form was superior, so he decided to use it for himself to learn its secrets, and the fight won't end until he does. Omega spends the fight learning his new body, including switching genders to see how differently each body moves. When you push each body to the limit, Omega decides that fighting you as a team might be more effective. Even fighting you as a group, Omega couldn't beat you, and even in defeat, he still can't understand how you do what you do. He can't understand Alpha either. Somehow, without fighting you, the little chocobo has become like you, gaining the ability to overcome great obstacles that should be too much for him. The thing that Omega can't understand is the human soul. It's something that no amount of fighting could teach. It was something that he could have learned if he had worked with you like Alpha did. Omega finally begins to understand the source of your power, and he wonders if he had it, would he be able to make it back home? But that's the opposite of how the human spirit and will works. If he could truly understand what it meant to be human, he would know that trying to take a journey that long would break the strongest will. Staring up towards his home, Omega finally understands and dies, which leads to the next problem. The rift starts to collapse. Fortunately for you, Biggs and Wedge come riding in on the back of Racevelga, sent of course by Midgard-Sormer to save the day. For his entire life, Midgard-Sormer had never asked Racevelga for anything, so he likely sent him to make up for the fact that he had led Omega to your world in the first place. Unfortunately, there's no telling how long it will take for the dragon to recover, but he's still watching the world while he sleeps. He had formed a bond with his new home, and he will continue to look after it. That help allowed you to survive your victory over Omega, something Sid is not going to complain about. With that situation resolved, you all head back to Ragga's Reach, while Biggs tells you how the two of them had come to the yawn to help when they saw the ether in the pit bubbling like crazy. They were gonna jump in, which would have definitely killed them when Racevelga showed up and offered to give them a ride, and the rest is history. Back at the Reach, after hearing about what you did, Jesse figures that what they will do if another Omega shows up is just build another U to send after it. But that's a problem for another day. For now, the other Alliance leaders are eager to hear what happened with Omega. Sid plans on telling them everything, although it's doubtful they'll believe the story. What the Warrior of Light needs is rest, and as for Alpha, after taking him for a walk around Ragga's Reach, the little chocobo decides to go on an adventure of his own to see the world with his own eyes. And after a tearful goodbye, the little chocobo heads off to see the world with a little Omega model that Biggs and Wedge had built that may have more of the real Omega in it than they think. This concludes the story of Omega. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, ding that notification bell, join the Discord, and if you really want to show your support, sign up to become a member of the channel. Until next time guys, later.